excited that you're all here and able to be here. This is one of the dreams of our church, is to unite together in things, and the way that we're doing that is the Adult Ed Committee came together with the Library Committee. To be honest, the Library Committee had the brilliant idea, so we'll give most of the credit to them. We're thankful that we could have this space, and physically, and also the space in your hearts for this, because this has been something that has been on people of DPC's heart for a long time, and we're able to look at it from a different lens and a different angle, so we're thankful for that opportunity. I'm going to pray for us, and then I'm going to invite Shelby to come forward, and then you're going to be able to have some time with Roger. So let's pray. Oh God, we are the ones who serve you. Let us always know where to be, whether it's next to someone who needs us, whether it's far away from someone who needs us. Whatever way, we are gathered here to be with you. What gifts and talents might we have to share with this world and a particular person in our life? It's stirring in us, and it may have already come to pass. We're thankful for all the opportunities that are enlivened from this discussion and this talk today, and we're thankful for the many people who have had the financials and also the love and care for the people of this greater community. In your name we pray, amen. Shelby.
Good morning. Oops. Good morning, everybody. It's just thrilling to me to see so many people here.
Speak into the mic.
It's thrilling for me to see so many of you here, smiling faces. I think you're in for a great morning with Dr. Saillant, and I'm so pleased he could be here. So I could go on a long time telling you about his resume, but I'm not going to spend any of our precious time reading everything that he's accomplished. So I'll let you do that on your own, and we'll get right to Roger's talk quickly. I wanted to start by saying Central Bucks in the 1940s and 50s and 60s was quite different from what it is now. Doylestown Borough was kind of the same, except that there's a lot more traffic now, a lot more cars. But as soon as you went out a few miles, it was quite different. There were dirt roads, one-room schoolhouses, farms, and that's where Roger lived. And we lived about half a mile from where Roger grew up. I don't want to take away from his story, I want him to do that, but he was placed on a subsistence farm when he was only 4 years old. And we moved maybe 10 years after you were placed there to a farm about half a mile from Roger. My brother became best friends with Roger. They met at this bus stop one day. My brother wanted to be a farmer, so he was always asking Roger questions about what happened on this farm, how things were profitable, what kind of work he did. And I was the little sister, and I had no idea what it was like for Roger, where he lived. I just knew Roger was good looking, and I knew he was very intelligent, and I probably had a crush on him too. But Roger and Bill, I wish Bill could be here today. Roger and Bill hung out together, and I did get little bits and pieces from Bill that Roger didn't live in a home like we did. I think you didn't have heat. You used an outhouse. You had to work. When we were on summer break, we were playing and Roger was working. So it was quite a different childhood than what we had. Roger's going to tell us some of those stories, but I don't want to neglect to tell you, for those of you who have not read his book, you're in for a remarkable journey with Roger. It's a series of vignettes, and it's told through the eyes of a child. and it's just captivating. You will cry, you will laugh. It's just quite amazing. But I don't want to neglect to tell you that proceeds from the sale of Roger's book are going to benefit KidsPeace, a DPC-supported organization that offers child care to kids of all ages, and it's a local one. And I know for many of you, foster care is dear to your hearts. So, without any further introduction, Roger.
That was bold of her to say that she might have had a crush on me. My wife is here somewhere, and I don't know if I need to use this or not. Let me try to. It's tough for me to be anchored in one place, just like it was tough to be anchored in one home. There's several things I want to clear up right away. A, the book is not a hardship story. B, we did get indoor plumbing eventually, although there were experiences with the outdoor plumbing. C, we did have heat in the kitchen, and there was a vent that led to the upstairs bedroom where the McClellans slept, and there was also a heater that did the same kind of thing in one part of the house. So I didn't want you to think that it was all one hardship after another. In fact, in the old times, they used to have the animals adjacent to the house, so the heat from the animals, we weren't quite that way, okay? But we did not have a car or a truck, and people did come to bring things to us, pick up our goods, and so forth, okay? So, I managed to be able to live in the 1800s, the 1900s, and the 2000s, because we were definitely based in the 1800s when I arrived. We used draft animals, horses. Mr. McClellan was afraid to use the tractor because he was afraid of setting a fire because of the sparks that would come out of the stack. And I think he was pretty intimidated by machinery. But having the horses allowed Richard, who is my older foster brother, I'm going to try to not tell the stories, but we had our own forms of play, not the least of which was racing the horses like they did in cowboy and Indian stories when Mr. McClellan wasn't around with the wagons and whatnot. And he would come to the field later and he would see the horses all lathered up, and we would just say, you know, it's really been hot. And hoping that he wasn't quite understanding exactly what we were doing. Foster care in the United States runs somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 children a year, and it hasn't changed much over the last 30 or 40 years. The abandoned children and homeless children in New York City actually started the what they called the foster home movement. And some of you may have heard of the orphan trains, where they would take children that were abandoned and send them to the west, to Oklahoma, Kansas, to help the farmers. The farmers would give them shelter, an opportunity for, you know, to be educated, food and shelter and education, in exchange that the children would grow up and be part of the workforce. We were part of that process. And the farm across from us, the Schaefers, they had foster children from the Lutheran home. And the turnover was very high. On our farm, the foster child who preceded me was killed in a truck accident, and then I became the replacement for that child. And in my particular case, I lacked promise in the evaluations of the ACE Society. Who knows what I was suffering from, anaclitic depression, PTSD, whatever the modern terms are. They put me on the farm with the idea that I would learn how to be a productive member of society. And often choices were made like that because what they were trying to do was to provide a vehicle to create people who weren't necessarily going to be dropouts to society and a burden on society, so we earned our own way. The point behind the power of being seen is that as you grow up, you can be influenced if people truly connect to you, if you are seen. But as adults, the same thing can happen. Think how it feels to not be seen at all. Think in terms of what's happening today with the mass shootings and so forth. A lot of these people have been suffering from not being seen. They're angry, they're reaching out, and as destructively as they do, there is behind that a deficiency in our society. And I gotta be careful because I don't want to be preaching too much, but the implications of this book are that it may be situated in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1961, but the states of mind of children growing up under these circumstances are really the same. They suffer abandonment. They wonder who they are. What did they do to become, to be placed in a home? They're often used rather than simply loved. They suffer from the absence of affection and attachment. So those conditions, regardless of whether they're on a farm in those early years or today, still exist in the child's psychological development. So the intention of writing the book was to write in the language of the experience of seeing the world and interpreting the world and reacting to the world from the viewpoint of a child at different stages of development. I had the book assessed in terms of reading level, and I was trying to keep it not too sophisticated and certainly not loaded with a lot of retrospective insight, but rather to try to find out if the language was appropriate. The language in the book is about 7th grade. So it's a 7th grade reading level, so it's relatable to almost anybody who's trying to look at these experiences. The back of the book has a section by Ray Shimmer, who's been dealing with foster children professionally his entire career, and he makes an assessment and puts it into a bigger perspective. So I hope that in that sense you'll find it useful. So that was what I wanted to say in terms of, just as an intro. That was a long introduction, I understand. But the point behind it is, since most of you, I think, have read it, since most of you are involved in an effort to try to see and help others, not only children, but others in your community, I would like to ask you to ask me questions, specific or general, based on the kinds of implications that I've just probably created in this conversation early on. Any questions? Yes?
Are the people who born you aware of what happened to you?
Well, that is an interesting story.
Did you ever know them?
What?
Did you ever know your parents?
Well, I met my father, my blood father, when I was 48 years old. And I met him 3 times, and I would not say it was exactly, it wasn't hostile from my perspective, but from his perspective, I was still I was a problem and not something that he wanted to celebrate necessarily. He kind of had an inquisitive, if you were able to serve him kind of idea, he was interested in, because he had a number of different children. He was looking at children as assets, not necessarily as of a family. My mother was she was very liberal with her gifts, and as a result, she had at least 5, maybe 6 children who, through 23andMe, they've discovered a path to me over the years. So as recently as 3 years ago, I found out about another half-sister. Before that, about 6, maybe 8 years before that, another half-sister. and she would never admit who the fathers were. But I did make contact with her, but it wasn't real rewarding. So, okay. So I did meet blood relatives. By the way, I may as well tell you the story very quickly. She was 22, married, and my father was 15, and a friend of the family. And they were closer friends than people realized. Eventually, her husband at the time, my birth name, Saillant, kicked her out, and then she went on to keep propagating. Okay, any other questions? So, yes.
I haven't read your book, so I don't know how you aged out of the system and how you got to where you are. Because one of the problems we've noticed is that 18 and then that's it.
Aging out has become a real recognized problem with foster children. In my particular instance, my last foster home was in Buckingham with the Pearsons. The Pearsons were college educated, had 4 children who all went to college or were going to college, and on that kind of track, I ended up kind of living with them and back and forth while I was in college, and then I went on to graduate school. So that was how so they were the bridging family for me. But in Canada, I'm working with a foster care group in Canada, and they have a policy in the province of Ontario where every child who's capable, when they age out, is given a type of scholarship, a free education beyond that. So there is a lattice work available to them. That's becoming more of a practice in the United States. One of the organizations that I'm working with is CASA, which is the Court-Appointed Special Advocates Program National. And these volunteers, there's a formal organization that's state by state supported. They're committed to helping children bridge past the aging out problem. Because in aging out, in the traditional sense, when a child grows up in a normal family, you know, maybe there's car support, there's a house, there's guidance for jobs and all of that. In a lot of the situations, it's just, okay. And you know the failure rate, about 6%, about 1 in 6 people become homeless within 18 months. There's a high percentage of foster children, or children, well, just by label of foster children, in prisons. The rate is something in the neighborhood of 60 to 80%, depending on the statistics. So the failure rate, which really starts at the, and it becomes clear at the aging out point, is remarkable. Okay? Yes?
Do you have any statistics on how many foster children are eventually adopted?
Yeah, there's a lot of, first of all, foster children today are on average between 3.5 to 5 years. That's all the longer they're in foster care. There's a huge push to put children into foster care on an adoption path. It's very high, like in the 80%, if the child is less than, I think it's 11 years old. It falls off pretty rapidly after that, because just like in my book, there are things that you can do once you get 10 and 11 years old that are pretty tough to overcome. I mean, I was very angry at times. I was destructive, and I spent a lot of time stealing. I mean, I didn't mean a lot of time. I wasn't like I was a dedicated thief. It was the idea, though, that I didn't have a real concern for others. I did things that were very self-centered. One of the stories I tell is my older foster brother, who was a grand manipulator, and he had this idea that I've got this kid, he was 4 years older, and I was, to give you an idea what Richard was like, I came from school one day and I said, gee, Eddie Boyle has a really nice set of cap pistols, Hopalong Cassidy, white ivory handles, and all of that. He said, really? He's got 2 guns? And I said, yeah, he's got 2 guns. He said, well, look, why don't we set it up so we can take one? If he's got 2, one we can have, So anyway, we worked it out, and the gun was stolen from Eddie Boyle. I felt kind of bad about it, but I felt also that I was doing what Richard wanted. I was pleasing him. So that whole business of becoming, I'll just say, part of a mini gang, which you see and hear about, is because you're trying to be accepted by your nearest peer group. So Eddie Boyle loses his gun, his mother knows I've done it, she comes to the farm, the farmers don't believe because they don't hear any cap guns. You gotta remember that the McClellans at this time are in their 60s. They're just onset of 60. So that's like today, like 80. They're pretty much not expecting what kids are doing, so they stuck up for us. We never got any pleasure out of that gun at all, as I recall. But the fact of the matter is they stood their ground and said that Roger would never do something like that. And I'm, thinking, yes, he would. And yes, he did. So there's a real, the way you drift into bad behaviors, there's so many opportunities to do that, Yes.
How old do you think you were before you had your first kind of successful, healthy relationship? You want me to repeat?
No. How old was I before I had?
How old were you before you had what you considered to be a successful and healthy, like intimate friend or partner relationship based upon your upbringing?
I would say probably into my 30s. And it was really based on a lot of therapy. It was a lot of work. That's a really good question. It takes a long time because, I made a list, it's 2 pages long, of how I was seen or perceived to be seen by others. And it runs the gamut. But one of the things was even to this day, I can get drawn into the fact that I'm a lazy child, I'm a lazy man, I'm a lazy person. And I can't get away from that because on the farm we were expected to work. And I was constantly being lectured because I was reading or I was imagining, I wasn't productive enough, I wasn't keeping up, I wasn't doing my job. And so today I can go to that. And that subtracts from having a meaningful, healthy relationship because you're already a step down in your mind and your feelings about yourself. And I'd like to reassure you that I am productive, but I have to think about it. I can't just simply relax into it because that was just so drilled into me growing up. And also not trusting people. I mean, when you read the book, there people who were supposed to be doing things for you sometimes just reversed, and it didn't work out, the way you would have expected it to work out. Anything else? Yes.
I think your story is such a story of resilience, Roger, and I wonder if you could speak to us about what a community such as this community can do to promote that resilience for a child in foster care.
Yeah, that's it. I'm going to be on a panel in June passive. And one of the things, one of the questions is to talk about what can you do to help the inner child begin to emerge that should have been emerging, because the inner child is really thwarted, they're stunted, they're held back. And I would say it's a lot about taking the time to see the child, taking the time and showing the patience to really hear the child. Seeing the child is one thing, but really letting them know that they've been understood is truly something different. And it's up to you, we're the adults after all, it's up to us to figure out how to deliver the message that in fact you've been seen, you've been heard, and that you matter. So that the idea of resilience is, are they willing to keep on going with whatever they've put in their minds about themselves? Do they have enough resource? Are they charged as a capacitor that they can overcome things? And you have to teach them that they have that it's like being seen is like a series of gas stations, that there's another gas station out there. Don't let yourself get so run down you can't get to the next station, and don't give up. I have a thing at the beginning of the book. I say to all adults, never pass up the opportunity to see a marginalized child and encourage them. To all marginalized children, do your best to be open to the wisdom and guidance offered by adults who see you and you sense are trying to help you. Now, they've got to be taught to know who's really helping you versus who's manipulating you. So that kind of thing allows people to see, allows a child or another adult to see that they can keep on going, because there are way stations in life that are out there, there are opportunities that are out there, and to give up is tantamount. Is tantamount to suicide. I have a section in this book where I talk about my depression becoming so powerful that I was on the verge of committing suicide. And I'm a kid, but something that I had heard, or somehow I had been given the gem of an idea that there was a better prospect out there, that if I killed myself, I couldn't possibly ever have that experience. But somehow or other, I was instilled with curiosity, a curiosity about the possibility of what can happen in your life if you stay alive, and what doesn't happen if you kill yourself. And I was right on that knife edge. In fact, the worst, the double twist of all that kind of suicidal thought is, A, it's very nourishing. So there's a powerful force at work that makes it feel good and right. But the idea of punishing yourself because you didn't pull the trigger, that can also happen. So now I wasn't brave enough to really do it. That kind of thing. So in your socialization process, conversations, you've got to teach people that there's a lot of subtractive math that you can get seduced by, that the dark side really does exist, and don't be afraid to talk about the dark side. By avoiding it, you're not really connecting. You're not really seeing the person who could be suffering from that. And you've got to let them have some handholds to come out from it. Okay? Okay. And yes?
Early on you talked about your experience in association with people in the inner city with the kind of violence we're having today. Do you have any thoughts of, from what the work you've done and what you came up through? I have read most of your book already, so I understand what you've gone through. Of how that problem can be worked on also.
Yeah, my big dream is that there is an awareness that A, there is a problem that's going on, but the second is that we can have conversations like these about what it means to be really seen and go beyond. See, we too quickly in our society, in our culture, but probably in the world, we too quickly move to the idea of the other. Once you begin to classify even your nearest neighbor as those people on that block, or we insert that kind of language, then we're already dehumanizing the other person, and they become an object. And if you want to, since you've read most of the book, I kill a cow.
I'm a fine.
Hmm?
I said, I have a dairy farm, so I realized. I never did that.
I would hope not, but I still carry that burden.
See that anger that you must have had.
Yes, and the point of even putting that in the book, there's some things I left out of the book, but I put it in the book because I want people to know that you can become so angry, so exhausted in your hatred that anything in your path is an object. It doesn't matter that it's alive and it's feeling. And we do this with people much too readily. So we have to go back and have the conversation. I mean, the Zulus have it. The Zulu tribe greeting is, I see you. That's the way they see. That's the way they talk about each other. And I'm not trying to put the Zulus into some category, because after all, they wiped out the British at one point pretty handily. But the point really is, it begins with I see you. And that has to happen. It has to happen as a practice in society. So let's keep backing up for a second. One of the things that happens that we're missing in the United States today is the cadence of getting together on a Sunday, getting together with a gathering, whether it's in a church or whatever the religious theme you want, whatever group it is, or a Saturday, but getting together regularly and having a family grouping, some sort of social cadence. Now we're all over the place, and we're locked into allowing our younger people to be socialized through the media in some form. And I'm not talking about control, I'm just simply saying, where's the cadence where people are centered? I would say that the single biggest thing that ever saved me was the fact that I read and was encouraged to read. And I could read things that were beyond where I lived. I mean, beyond, Jefferson and Washington and, Lincoln, and there were characters not that were, that we were spending a lot of time devaluing them, but they were idealized. We don't do that. We don't have ritualistic church behaviors any longer that are guaranteed in enough instances. So that loss of a cadence, I think, really damages the outcome. So what do we need to do? We need to begin to have conversations like you're having. Conversations that say, not only is it the children, but it's the adults. Not only is it the fact that I'm, in this case, a Presbyterian, but that person's a Quaker. And I appreciate the fact that they have their own style of coming together. And you can go down through all the other faiths and practices and put some emphasis on respecting and understanding what's going on. So it's a hard work. So I said my big idea is that there are many, many others, all of you, and so many more that are beginning to have this conversation, beginning to have this kind of concern, that I'm hoping that these ripples of conversations begin to produce a tsunami of actions, because they come together, and you end up with something far greater than any one of you or any one of us is able to do, because it's a collective behavior that has to occur. It's not a bunch of one-offs. It's another type of cadence. 6 minutes? Okay, so, yes?
So Roger, you were presenting at the bookshop yesterday and you told the story of how you used your experience in your professional work before you retired internationally.
Yeah.
I think it's a great story if you could share that.
Sure. Very quickly, biographically, I worked for Ford Motor Company for 30 years. And early on in my career, because I was a farmer, I felt that doing basic research at the Ford Motor Company was okay, but I wasn't really earning my way. I was lazy. Well, so how could I help the company? An opportunity came up, even though I had no manufacturing experience, to go to Mexico and build a plant. Well, when I went to Mexico the first trip, the thing I was amazed with, this is in Chihuahua, was the complete poverty. And in my conversations with the people, I learned that generally education level is 5th and 6th grade. So instead of just simply launching the plant and imposing the will of the Ford Motor Company and the structure, I lucked out and was blessed to have a guy named Bruce Gibb who could both speak Spanish, which I couldn't, which was like a handicap. If you're going to be working in a country, you should know the language. Anyway, he was bilingual, but he had this idea of bringing people together and beginning to share what would be considered prejudices. What do Mexicans think of Americans? What do Americans think of Mexicans? And what can we do together to build a highly profitable, very successful plant where everybody benefited? We created mission values guiding principles. We spent 4.5 days in basically conversations with the first 15 of us that were there. And from that, we built a plant, 2 plants and an education center. And it was built with the heart and soul of the mission values guiding principles, but it was because we got to see each other, we got to understand each other, and I wanted it to happen because I was not going to inflict the same kind of behavior on them, impose my will on them like it had been imposed on me. So I was very open and invitational and didn't quite know it at the time, but I was able to connect, to kind of compensate, because I knew what it was like to be unseen and simply used. That plant became highly successful. That model became highly successful, and we were able to use that model in the Ford Motor Company, in 18 countries, and start plants in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Korea, in China, in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, in Argentina, in Brazil, Northern Ireland. By the way, Northern Ireland is an interesting story. I can tell it in 1 minute. We were given that plant, I was given that plant because it was going to be closed, and the European group, European Ford, thought that we could close it as Americans because it would just be ugly Americans doing whatever they do. Well, it turns out that that plant was unprofitable, unsuccessful, and low quality because 2 conveners, 2 union presidents, hadn't spoken to each other for 9 years. And they hadn't spoken to each other. It was the Irish Catholic thing going on in Northern Ireland and in the plant, because one of the conveners thought that the other convener had cut him off, exiting the parking lot. So we ended up having a meeting of the same model that we used in Mexico, and over time we turned that plant around and it became a very successful plant. There's a whole complicated story about that. But that idea was all because I had suffered from not being seen. So I've been able to reverse that story for other people by really making an effort to very explicitly see them. If that's what you wanted me to say.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, then, thank you. 2 minutes? Yes,
So when do you think you first felt seen?
today. At various times, I have felt seen. In this book, I think I felt seen for the first time by Miss Haddish, my 5th and 6th grade teacher. And she had an enormous impact on my development. She pumped me with books, and she gave me $2 at the end of the school year for reading the most books, having the highest average, and I felt like I was seen. Okay, but that doesn't mean that you can't just do that once.
Right.
It's got to happen over. The repetitive trauma has to be offset by repetitive love or being seen. Okay, I've taken a lot of your time. I hope you enjoy the book, and thank you very much.